But we're going to now move into talking about our topic. So last week we heard from Lizzie and Barnaby at COEL just around returning to the workplace. I think a topic that's affecting a lot of us to different degrees, has been in recent weeks, likely to be in coming weeks. In fact, there was a sort of BBC article that actually my colleague Shelley flagged up to me this morning, just on this morning, saying that, and they reckon there was a survey done and 91% of office workers want to work at home at least part of the time going forward. And, you know, there's going to be an element of, you know, can you put the genie back in the bottle? I think now that people have seen how efficiently you can work at home, I think now managers perhaps have seen how they can trust staff working at home. Perhaps this is something that's going to be with us in some form indefinitely. I mean, you can't ignore a statistic like 91%. And the reasons given, I think, you know, some people talking about cost savings. In fact, you know, people almost talking about the fact it's almost like having a pay rise, being able to work at home because of the saving on travel, the additional family time, the work-life balance, and even the ability to focus on work. I must admit, I find my productivity far higher when I'm at home on my own than when I'm in a workplace. You know, so productivity perhaps increasing. What I personally find though is it's the more creative, collaborative side of things that suffers. So I think, you know, there are obviously big questions around, you know, how many people you can have in your workplace, how often people might be in the workplace. You know, I think perhaps the day of the 9 to 5, 5-day a week in the office perhaps is now doomed. How large, therefore, the workplace will need to be, and actually what will we do in the workplace? You know, what kind of actual activities will be prioritized for in the workplace rather than the kind of stuff, you know, I'm thinking increasingly, if I'm busy, maybe I'll stay at home so I can actually crack on and get on with actual work. And then if I'm not so busy, that's when I'll go into the office to do the more cultural stuff, to do the more team orientated stuff. So, you know, a lot of questions I think that a lot of us are asking ourselves, and we're going to be discussing through the course of this webinar. So I've put together a little panel of speakers who are hopefully going to help us out with some of their own ideas. And as one or two of them have even said to me, I mean, imagine there's no right answers in this, it's just sharing ideas and sharing experiences. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, but we've got Hannah, Ruth, Sophie and Clive joining us just to talk through their experiences. So perhaps Hannah, can I ask you to introduce yourself to start with?
Yeah, of course you can. I'm Hannah, I'm from Hart. We're an accountancy firm based in Sheffield, so we're a regional firm based in Sheffield.
Fantastic. And maybe Ruth?
Hi, I'm Ruth Everett. I'm from Saffery, Champness. So we're a national firm, so it's 12 figures, but I work within the Peterborough office, so much more focused. And I have a practice background, but now solely work on the people side, so both nationally and for Peterborough. So.
Fantastic. And that is often the journey, isn't it? You know, we spend so long qualifying as accountants, do all these exams, and then within a few years, you're not doing technical numbers anymore. You're moving into the people stuff here. I think that's something we can all relate to. Sophie?
Hi, yes, I'm Sophie. I'm from AAT, head of HR at AAT. I actually just joined 6 months ago. So just as COVID was coming into light and changing the world for us.
Fantastic, and you know, great to have that perspective. And then Clive?
Hi, I'm Clive. I'm part of the Professional Insights team at ACCA, and veteran of these, I suppose, by now, Gareth.
Yeah, no, certainly, and thanks to all four of you. Thanks, Clive, for joining us again. So, I mean, you know, I want this to be fairly free-flowing and fairly informal as a discussion, but perhaps if I can ask, you know, and I don't mind who really chips in to start with, but if we actually go back 4.5 months to the very beginning, you know, what sort of response initially did the organisations that you represent have to the initial lockdown?
Do you want me to go? I'll go
Yeah.
first. I think we were quite lucky. We've got a small IT department, but they were on this. They were completely on it. And actually, the week before, we had a trial lockdown half day where everybody worked from home for half a day to, one, make sure that they could, and two, make sure that our IT server would cope with everybody working from home. So we'd actually done a little bit of a trial run there. So actually, when it came to was it Monday the 23rd, we were pretty much as ready as we could be. Don't get me wrong, there were a lot of teething issues in that first few weeks, and some departments coped with it better than others, but I think by virtue of the fact that some departments had worked remotely as part of their normal working, part of their normal role, so it was just a little bit more challenging for those that hadn't done it before, but we got there.
Cool, thanks, Hannah. And actually that idea of a trial, Sophie, I seem to remember the AAT did something similar just before lockdown, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of weeks before lockdown, we could see what was coming and put into place sort of a full day trial where everybody worked from home, really just to see if the systems held up. And yes, thankfully they did. And we actually took the position, we were quite cautious. We moved a week before the government brought in lockdown to move almost everybody to work from home. There were the odd few who maybe didn't have the equipment at that point, but otherwise we were sort of working from home early because we'd found that it had worked on our trial day.
And was that in any way driven by the fact that obviously your office is bang in the sort of middle of busy London?
Yeah, absolutely. So the majority of our staff are getting on busy tube trains or, you know, overground trains as well, a few that cycle. But yeah, I think that increased the risks, and London were ahead of the curve to other parts of the country. So sort of factoring that in as well into the decision.
Yeah, sure. And Ruth?
Yeah, we did an early run. Yeah, so we in teams, and basically everyone had to have tried before, and then en masse. And interestingly, started it on choice as well. To use over officially at that point, but it was which gave a good measure maybe about the return, but we'll see. You know, so basically said, if you want to from this point, do it. It's not official yet, but we think it's coming. So, which then, as you said, left a few people, but maybe they're exactly the same people who want to go back first. Interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. And Clive?
Similar kind of story, I think. We did a 2-day over weekend dry run on the 13th of March, and then decided on the 16th, I think, as government guidance started to flip, that was it. I think what we learned, obviously we have an office in China which had gone through this in January, so we were watching a lot of what was happening there and worked out, yeah, this is pretty much what was going to happen. So that got us into that prepared zone.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I remember back to that kind of back end of March into April, and in some respects there was an exhilaration because it was all so new and also almost exciting, and albeit in awful circumstances. But I think there's that adrenaline that really, you know, takes you through those first few weeks, which is definitely worn off now. You know, that first month or so, you know, what would you say were the big challenges that came to light once everyone was up? Because it did have to happen so quickly.
I think for us it was one of the difficult things was keeping people informed, and even keeping people informed when there was nothing to keep them informed about, but making sure they knew that there was nothing that they needed to be informed about, if that sort of makes sense. I think people sometimes thought that we were being quiet because there was something happening, but it was just because there was nothing happening. We were trying, or there were decisions were trying to be made, or ideas were being formulated, but actually there was nothing to communicate. So that's something that we sort of had a bit of a shift with, and we've decided to do just a regular update with everybody, even if there's nothing to say, to put everybody's mind at rest that there is nothing that we need to be telling them. And I think also from us, it's the remote audit working has been the biggest challenge in those first that first month, where some things clients wanted things to go ahead, and then us trying to work about that differently. And I think sometimes we maybe tried to approach that the way that we would normally approach it, but really it needed a whole different tact. So that's been something that we've been mastering over these last few months.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the point actually you're making about kind of regular updates, I've always been a believer that an absence of formal communication will be replaced by informal communication, but gossiping tends never to give the true picture. So you almost have to step in and just do it more regularly. Ruth, what about your perspective in practice as well?
Just on the communication point, just entirely the question you're asking, but we started, as you say, people thinking misinformation what there is. We actually did a Q&A, so we've been doing it fortnightly, and we're going to keep it because it's a really useful format. And so getting all the office together, but but effectively people put questions into me and then I deliver them to the senior leader team. And so not only is it thinking about what you're not saying, everyone asks the questions, so you can then answer them whatever they are. We say we don't know the answer, we do know. And a lot of it, you know, has been trying to give some people some certainty in a world where there's no certainty, isn't it? And then how you pitch that, but by just standing there and saying, well, we don't know about this, but this is what we're thinking. Or so that was a really big positive. So in terms of communication methods, and whether that started in the first month, I have no idea now. Don't remember it. I think on the change things, and so it was change management, wasn't it? So lots of people. And I don't know when you referred to different teams responding differently to it, about whether that's teams because they've done it before, or teams about maybe the nature of the work they do and how receptive to change they would be. So that's individuals and teams, and also some tendencies in some teams who found the change aspect, whatever it was a big change that was going to be difficult to manage. And then the changes came very rapidly with other things that happened within the firm and obviously outside. So dealing with that and the emotions attached and having the ear was a big piece. But ultimately we were really lucky. We brought in, it was ironic actually, our Agile working policy on the 1st of April. So I working with people constantly, all this work the last 2 years to persuade people. So one, we brought the tech piece in, and also and then it all kind of, we thought, well, we just finished the pilot and we got the okay. So about day one of our Agile working policy, where 2 days out of 5 are allowed to work, obviously everyone worked every day, so went a lot of energy, but it did mean we'd already set ourselves up, which was just happenstance, you know, it was a kind of one of those things. So had it happened a year earlier, I think we would have been in quite a different position, but with effectively in reaction to space already and people's desires. So accelerated the process.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. So, and I mean, Sophie, Clive, I mean, obviously, you know, institutes, awarding bodies are their own beast. I mean, any differences in the challenges that you experienced?
Certainly communications was one, but actually, whilst we'd done our test to prove that all of our IT systems would hold up and people could connect, I think the issues then came actually in helping people set up their own workspaces at home. So not everyone had actually somewhere comfortable to sit and work. So actually doing those DSE assessments, people were suddenly having to look after their own childcare, so children not in school. So working with individuals and managers to try and be as flexible as possible to sort of say, okay, well, how are you going to work around that? How can we do it? How can we help you with it? So, and I'd say it's not a challenge that's fully gone away. So as we sort of are realizing this is going on for longer, people are suddenly going, actually, I'm less comfortable with my dining room chair. This was okay when I thought it was till September, but now you're telling me the end of the year. Yeah, so it's just trying to actually help people set up that physical environment, have their broadband working and such like.
Yeah, I mean, we had I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, but quite an arresting statistic from a speaker saying that nearly 50% of people now working at home are complaining of actual physical pain as a result of their workplaces not being set up appropriately, which, you know, was quite powerful. Clive, any thoughts?
To add to that, I think I can't remember the statistic, there's some frightening statistic around about the use of ironing boards as desks by particularly millennial generations. I would agree entirely. I think the one thing is about communication, and with that structured communication from the viewpoint of, you know, center out and within teams, or that informal water cooler communication, I think the lesson that we all learned is communicate, but over communicate, because don't assume that knowledge goes through the grapevine. And equally, tools like Slack or Teams or whatever, the chat functions on those become increasingly important. And I hear a lot of people talking about how they're using them more. We do in our team a lot more for that informal stuff, but also for the structured stuff, because you need to keep those wheels moving.
And you know, it's kind of what I've seen personally as being almost the change in the challenge over 4 or so months is, you know, it's gone from more of that short-term communication of keeping everyone in the loop. Things were changing so quickly. You know, you're almost getting decision fatigue of the number of decisions you're making on the hoof. And as time has passed, my concern personally is, do you get a loss of the kind of creativity, the collaborative aspect of working with people, which, you know, Zoom calls tend to have quite a rigid agenda and a specific purpose. So some of those more, you know, off the cuff, you know, no real purpose chats that you have with people, which actually stimulate a lot of really good thinking, I think, are the things that are lacking. So, you know, for me, that's how the challenge has almost changed in the last 4 months. I mean, any other sort of thoughts on different challenges that have emerged more recently?
And I think I'd agree with those. I mean, that a sense, particularly for an external thinker, that sense of being able to spark the ideas, and I think it's absolutely true. I think there are collaboration tools out there. They're not as easy, but trying to replicate that informality is something to think about. And it goes to social contact and things like that. And I think that's going to be one of the changes of returning back to the office environment, is what that balance is actually for.
Interestingly, when we did the Agile working, we actually brought in Skype to do that, but actually they disabled instant messenger. It wasn't going to be part of the package, i.e. the experience for other problems where actually it leads just to people having conversations that shouldn't be in real life, and they just said it wasn't necessary, you know, that wasn't. So obviously that now is allowed to be used, and now it's being used as we're delivering how to coach trainees remotely type training, you know, and part of that would be where is it appropriate to use and how does that look, and imagine a world without. So that's just completely moved on, just as a mindset, and people are seeing the positives because now it's essential, but it does silo. Yeah, I think it's really, we actually surveyed people about, I think it's quite interesting, about how they felt about what was good and what was bad and kind of things and that, and the relationships and the technologies that were both the good and the bad, if that makes. So that thing about, you talk to different people in different ways. So actually some of the team working together as a team is actually, especially because we work nationally, you might be working with a VAT manager who's in Bristol, and you might, you know, and those things have really got close, and you're suddenly getting, and it's very easy to be invited to a trainee, say to a client closing meeting they wouldn't normally be if it was for a client they were working for that's based out of Edinburgh or something, you know. So those communications are actually much better, and then, but it's the water cooler ones that aren't there. So the sense of it's the informal, it's not for the purpose, is it? Because that's the difference, isn't it? If you've got a purpose, you know what you're all trying to achieve, and there's actually different methods of working really well, and we're really positive about that. But at the same time, it's nearly the ones that don't have an agenda before, like Gareth says. There's no outcome we already know, and don't know who already wants to talk to. We just.
Well, I mean, I always say to people that my entire career, certainly now, is based around a lack of quantifiable deliverables. You know, I'm always thinking, you know, 2 years down the line, and it's those conversations that are happening less commonly, I think. You know, we're talking a lot about next week and next month, but not so much about next year or the year after, which, you know, I think we have to reset ourselves a little bit. Any other sort of thoughts on how the challenges have changed?
I think just following on from what you said about the collaborative working, so we are very much a training firm, and whilst we've been able to keep that going throughout this with the use of Teams and Zoom and everything, and it has worked very well, there's something about those trainees being surrounded by people who are, you know, a year ahead of them, 2 years ahead of them, leading by example, even just seeing how they speak to somebody on a telephone, seeing how people interact with each other in the office environment, I think is something that's sort of lacking at the moment, and that's part of the reason we sort of press forward with some more office working, particularly for those more junior members of staff.
Well, actually, that's a good sort of point, perhaps, for us to maybe more transition towards actually where are we all now in terms of that move back to the workplace, because I think, Hannah, that's a point I've heard a number of times, is that challenge of bringing new staff or less experienced staff into, you know, the culture, even more broadly than just, you know, how would you know, deal with somebody on the phone or whatever, which, you know, in itself is a very good point, because you just don't hear that around you now. But can I just ask where everyone kind of currently is in that journey back to, you know, people working in the office? Maybe Hannah, maybe you start.
Yeah, so our goal is to try and get people in, those that need the support, to be in the office. So we have up to 50% in the office. We are quite fortunate that we've got quite a bit of space in our office. We've been able to spread out, and we've also got meeting rooms that we've turned into sort of audit bubble rooms or team working rooms, or even study rooms for our students as well, so that they can study collaboratively, because something that they're sort of missing a little bit. But we are quite fortunate with that. But yeah, our priority was to get those trainees who, particularly those who've been here maybe less than a year, And now we've got our new intake for this year just starting over these next few months. So again, they are our priority. We didn't want to have those people starting remotely. It just didn't feel like it was the right fit for us, because we've got a very sociable, friendly culture, and that's kind of what we built the business on, and it's all about helping and supporting each other. And it just felt very strange to bring somebody in at 18 who's never worked anywhere before and say, well, you work from home, you can ring us on this Microsoft Teams, but that's it. And it just, yeah, so that's our reason for pressing forward with that, and it's worked out well.
And who would they be in the office with?
So we have
presumably not just a load of new people.
No. So we've got some management team in as well to support. And again, they're sort of we're on a bit of a rotation basis, so that because we can't accommodate everybody. But also that rotation basis works quite well, because these individuals then get introduced to different people over a period of time, and they get to learn different things from these different people. So it's working. It's not ideal, but it's better than it could have been, maybe.
Fantastic. And actually, Ruth, can I ask how your journey kind of compares to that?
So we're not back in at all yet, but we are. We've just been cleared, sort of health and safety, and they actually started in the north because the internet it's interesting actually, because internet connectivity issues. So you've got an M&S office. So actually, there's a reality of like, so you've got a national firm, who do you put in first and what the order is? But that's partly why they served aid all of us. So anyway, they're working around the country. So we've actually just got the okay, and we're on phase 1, which is about welfare. So the return is people who need to, and that's picking up Sophie's point about childcare hasn't changed for a lot of people yet, because actually there's only 2 school groups. So there's people who want to come in for that reason, or lone working is a big thing. And that is the other trigger for the trainees coming in, is actually the reality is they're the one tend to be working, they're at home alone, and that's a big thing about how that looks. Although they're quite creative, like we have a couple who just have, we have multiple screens, so they just have a couple of people on the screens all day, as if they're sat next to them at their desks, and they just run it, and they do the whole day like that, and then they rotate, and anyway, but so yeah, so we're basically, so we've just been given the okay, so we're at phase 1, which is finding out who needs to go. And interesting, it really shows you the appetite, because the list, there were 60 in Peterborough, and the list is 6 who expressed any interest, to give you a scale, on a like needs basis. And then phase 2 is a bit more of a wants basis, and then phase 3 is going to be, which I think you'll probably lead on to, which is the interesting aspect of don't want to but need to, or where's the future going? So yeah, the aim was the 1st of September. So they told, talking in terms of how you communicate and give some certainty and uncertainty, we've always just said back a couple of, we're aiming for the 1st September subject to government guidance, to give some people some idea of where it's going, but I think it will be sooner than that. And obviously Boris changed the guidance last week, wasn't it? So yeah, so that's how we're sitting. And in terms of how it's being debated, so much consultation and looking at and it does change on those numbers, because that changes something completely. If you only have 6 people want to go in, then do we go straight to phase 2 or 3? And how that then looks to get the most out of. The other big thing that I'd be interested to know, so about how you're dealing with that, was about how much we surveyed, and most people wanted to still be, if they were going back, that the majority wasn't in the office, i.e. they came out like 2 days a week was their ideal that way, and therefore starting from the off, that's how you rotate. We assumed we were going to do rotational weeks in and out, but actually, is it going to be 2 days a week? Because actually 2 days a week is then building into the new norm, and how that looks. So, and the 1st September is when we take our new trainees. So exactly the same point about how the reality of that looks for a trainee, and how you recreate. It's a really fine balance, isn't it? Because the reality is there's a lot of element of this going forward. So how much energy you put into creating a normal that does work, and you do have people feel like they're part of a culture. So we can come on to like kind of the things we do to make you still feel part of the Peterborough office, even though we've not been in it, versus relying on the office opening to fulfil that, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like as things move. So that's the sort of debate. But the reality is there's going to be time for them to be in the office, and just to go and get laptops, and they have to be on the systems for that. But yes, that's where we're sitting at.
Go back to that point, actually. I mean, you mentioned there's quite an interesting point around the internet connectivity in Inverness, for instance. I mean, would things like transport infrastructure play into that decision as well? I mean, I don't know it, but would I guess that it's quite easy to drive and park at your Inverness office compared to, say, a London office?
Yeah, so complete. So they surveyed each office, and 75% say show some concern about returning. So half for our office was little, and but that's completely different in other offices, and it nearly completely swings on how you get to work. So our office, 92% of people go by car, and then 92% of people are fairly happy, about getting to work. It's not like, and then the other 8 can make a change, and actually they were opting to do that. So I think, but other offices, that's not the case, and I'm sure you have that, and that's completely, even like our Guernsey office reopened, they barely shut because it was kind of, that's a completely different model again. So those experiences not being very different for local, and the thing is, it's all coming to an individual, isn't it? And so it's all the things that would affect an individual's life affects their level of concern, which then means you're nearly factoring for every individual circumstances, isn't it? And that's why this challenge and exciting.
It makes me wonder, how many glamorous head offices in London may within a couple of years be in Stevenage or somewhere on the outskirts of London, or potentially even further afield. I mean, Sophie, obviously we already mentioned around, I visit the AAT office at the Barbican regularly, and I wouldn't want to get there without using public transport typically. So where are you on the journey to getting back to the office?
Yeah, so I suppose in the same way that we approached lockdown, we're taking quite a cautious approach out. We don't have a date yet, but the CEO is talking about sort of final quarter of this calendar year. And it would be very much on a sort of phase. So we have 3 floors in a building. The intention is that we would sort of open up a floor at a time. And we're going to be surveying staff next week to see what that appetite is, because we do know that there are people who want to get back there. They really want the social side of it, or they need to get away from their family, or whatever it might be. So we are planning, we're just really keeping on top of all the government guidelines. So we've been working on remodeling the floors. What does that look like? Thinking about, well, how do we do communications? Because one of the things we're nervous about, of course, is once you go back to the office, behaviours and old habits die hard. So actually, can we sort of send out pictures of what the office is going to look like? Can we do a bit of nudge theory with the wayfinding on the floor and stuff, so people are prepared before they go in? But we're not there yet.
We did that. They did it for the High Wycombe, because the outgoing post went out of our High Wycombe office, so they sent a video around exactly so everyone knew what to expect. And then we've done it for our office, and now it's been taped, and so that's been a really and if anything, the nudge is now going a little bit because it doesn't look that great a place to go. If you watch it, the kitchen's going to be the kitchen, I think, was going to close it now. It's not worth, because it ended up with one chair in the middle. It was kind of, and actually, so the nudging a little bit now is trying to show. We made some videos into an international thing where there's positive memories of the good things. So everyone together on this to try and, because actually you can go too far the other way with the kind of but yeah, I think the video, that was a really simple, I think it was really effective, and they did that before they surveyed, so said, this is what this is what you feel about it, and then how do you feel about watching that video, basically, and how would you want to go on?
Yeah, we did some almost walk around videos for staff, but we also did, because we've reopened offices for hosting AAT exams, and we did some walk around videos to send to students as well, and actually that proved very effective for hopefully reducing any concerns they might have. Clive, what about the ACCA?
I think a similar kind of message, to be honest. We've had focus groups looking at what we do, and I think those are still being worked through as the guidance continues to evolve. Obviously, we're central London, central Glasgow, so predominantly at least. So that gives a different focus. But I think something you touched on earlier on, that this evolution of what the workplace is going to be for, you start to hear more about collaboration spaces. Hannah sort of hinted at that as well, and less about workspaces. And you hinted earlier on, Gareth, about if I want time to focus on something, I might work at home, I might go into collaborate. And I think that's a lot of this starts to work through. And I hear a lot also from what we heard last week about people remodeling offices. The only thing that in the back of my mind triggers is we end up with a a group of haves, if you like, that have gone back in, a group of have-nots that don't go so much back in. And if we're all talking about corporate culture, we've got to make that into one culture. And there are some stories around about organisations that really struggle with those that have to go back in, and then prioritise against those that have been allowed not to, in the sense of, well, why me? So there are lots of those things that we need to sort of pick up and address as well.
Actually, you're sort of starting to talk there about actually what changes, there will be in the workplace. I'd be quite interested to sort of get a bit of insight. Because, we had the speakers last week who were showing some mock-ups of some, new offices, and, they look like, I would kill for my lounge to look like some of these new offices. I would love to spend a couple of hours relaxing in some of these comfy chairs, and so what would you expect the sort of changes to be just in the sort of practical physical workspaces?
I think the first thing, and there's some evidence from Germany who are sort of a few months ahead of us down the path on this, that the mentality of offices being more collaboration zones, more meeting zones, but obviously meeting zones have to be bigger and engineered in different ways. And that also goes to social etiquette of how you use them. That there was an interesting thing that came out this morning about a US experience, but don't start your meeting until everybody has a mask on. And it's the sort of psychology things that you have to think about as well. Of how you use those spaces. So I think increasing less focus on desks, more focus on collaboration being bigger, and that's where you get into the chairs and the booths and things like that more and more. And I think you're right. I think there is a real estate problem, and evidence from China so far, the people I talk to there, suggests that office space doing that, simply there's a real fear that there is a property bubble about to burst in China on office space.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't want to be sitting on a large amount of commercial office space at the moment as an investment, if I'm honest. Ruth, do you get a sense of what changes there may be, not necessarily in the short term? But
it's interesting, because it's that decision about, I was on a call yesterday about the working on the basis as a vaccine. Yeah, and that might be an interesting, because your influence, Clive, sounds like is from the Chinese experience, because you've got that, and actually this company is Danish owned and they only have 600 cases. So they're a parent company, big Peterborough employer, but parent company is very much set up for everyone to go back. Usually, on the basis it's going to be about, it's not going to be a long-term problem. Whereas I think we're sort of in that in between, aren't we? And the investment you put into that to change. I mean, there's some very easy practical things that are happening before we open, which is that all paper files are getting archived. So there's going to be a lot more space before we even go back. So there's not, because everything obviously has got, no one got a printer. So we haven't supported that. So there's a lot of space, and even you talk about the move out of London. So things that happened out of our London office, centrally, things being centralised, all the posts. So for example, we won't need, there's a whole franking machine area in our office now. Well, that's centralised and it goes out of High Wycombe. So things that have happened. So just in a very practical, there's more space. But I don't think that they're not making the move yet to change, reconfigure. And I don't know if that's partly simply about the waiting to see, as in, because they're big decisions on it, it's big investments, enough investments to cover off just the health and safety. They're putting in machines to measure our temperature as you walk in. This is the landlord, because obviously they want us back because there's 4 other people in the building. So they're going to measure you, and if your temperature is too high, you get a big siren and you're not allowed in the building. And that's the landlord doing that, though, not us. So the investment, so where that's going to go, and that whole vaccine, no vaccine, are we looking at fundamental change? So I think for the moment it's now, can we get X number back, and you're going to do those things, but also like Sophie's point about the reality is all meeting, if you're in the office, you're going to be sat like this doing a meeting. I'm not going to be doing that to make that inclusive. You can't have it where people aren't, so therefore what you've imagined version of going back to the office is going to look like versus the reality. That's very clear. And some sort of talking about is moving all the handsets, all the phones, so go straight to soft phones, which then, so that'll happen between. So nearly like accelerating some evolutionary things that make sense, but not wholesale shift yet, because we're not quite there yet, as in what the new normal is going to look like. But that getting your head around that and nearly even hearing, if you look at where the desks go and you say, it's every third desk you can use. Are you actually going to hear anyone on the phone? You know, it's like a very, it's interesting. So the benefit, which I'd be interested to see like how that goes, and if they change those rules. But yeah, so in terms of the move, it's like it is the phase one, isn't it? And then what leads to the whole. And being a national firm, there might be some stuff that comes to us from it. So using space, that's more of a thing in London. But they have their own challenge in London, because that's interesting, because, for example, they want to reopen. They can't offer the 2 to 5 because a lot of them are younger graduates who may be working in smaller flats but don't have open space. So they're saying they're going to, and they've all moved out of London during lockdown, so they've got their parents. So if they need to reopen the office completely because they want to be able to go in every day. So we all live relatively close to it. So currently 85% of our grads in London aren't living in London. So then that changes how you have to reopen an office, because you've got to make it available 5 days a week.
Yeah, I guess, you know, for a national firm as well, you know, fundamental change like this will come with a certain price tag, and, you know, who wants to budget for that sort of capex at the moment when, you know, the economy itself is so uncertain at the moment. Hannah, can I bring in your thoughts on how you envisage your physical workplace changing?
I think we're in a very similar position, that we're not planning for any big whole-scale long-term changes, and we don't really want to. We like what we've got and how it's worked, and it works well for the team, because we are some of the office is quite open plan space. So although that's restricted because it's meant we've had less people in those areas, there's still been the space spread out there as well. So at the moment, yeah, the only real changes that we've made at the moment is to make these collaborative working spaces that can be used for certain things, but obviously they're restricted with how many people that can use them at any one time, and changing over teams that can use them. But I see more of that, and actually we've got quite a few meeting rooms that, in a way, meeting rooms haven't been needed in the same way, because obviously a lot of meetings have been done virtually. So, well, virtually all meetings have been done virtually. So it's just meant that we could use those spaces for that collaborative working.
So it sounds like the jury is still a bit out on actually, because I mean, we took on some extra space in actually our Cambridge office. We took on 50% extra space right at the end of last year, which I'm really pleased I did now, given it's been empty for several months. But we were about to embark on a refit of quite a lot of the space, which we put the brakes on kind of in middle of March. And I wonder, I mean, we haven't even made that decision of how different will it then look once we come back to doing the refit, when, you know, we're getting back to the real world. You know, to what extent will we still have big classes full of lots of students, or will we have to have more, you know, almost collaborative kind of breakout areas that students can use? So, you know, that in itself is an interesting one. But, you know, I suppose beyond the kind of physical workspace, I'm also interested in kind of that more people-related aspect, which we've already been touching on. So I thought, Sophie, maybe you'd be a good one to sort of talk a little bit about changes to the people side of things.
Yeah, I think that it's something that we're really cautious of, and, you know, we've had themes coming through around communications and how do we do that. I think it was Clive as well that was saying about that 2-part workforce. Now, yes, working in the office, you do get that informal communication, you get that collaboration, there's a potential feel of you might be closer to it. So how's that going to work with those who might be choosing because they're shielding or they've can't come into work? I don't think we've got the answers to that yet, but it's something that sort of needs to continuously be monitored about how we're going to actually make everyone still continue to feel part of the workplace. You know, so far, everyone's all been in this together. Everybody's working from home. Everyone, whilst their own situation is different, there is that sort of unity between us. So the concern is how that sort of diversity split in the future might draw us away. But it is, I think, the mental well-being of staff. People are reacting so differently to this. For some, actually getting back into the office is going to be really key for them. And I think we're probably seeing it come more and more. So, you know, people who we thought, yeah, great, they're doing really well working from home, this could be their future, and now suddenly going a few months in, actually this isn't as good as it was. Yeah, I enjoyed the perk of not traveling, but now, you know, do I actually want that differentiation? My bedroom is my office and I spend however many hours a day in it. So I think there are lots of things to be balancing out on that people side, that really about ensuring that we're trying to create a culture, but also understand everybody's individual needs as well, and how we can support different people through it.
You know, that idea of individuality, I think it's going to be critical. You know, I was reading something this morning that some younger adults are actually finding this beneficial to their mental health, and needless to say, there's a lot on the opposite end of the scale. So, you know, and perhaps a lot of it comes down to your individual. You know, I wonder whether we're going to have to be looking at who's extrovert and introvert in terms of where they draw their energy from. You know, who's got the appropriate setups at home, connectivity, who's got a car, who's not got a car, who relies on public transport. So there's so many facets to it. Do you need to have a very individual approach to each individual member of staff, rather than lumping a cohort together and saying, right, well, those 12 staff, they can all do the same thing because they all, you know, have the same kind of avatar. So yeah, I think that's going to be. You got any thoughts on that, Hannah?
I think when we started out with this, we did a questionnaire with the team just to get an idea of what they were thinking, what they were feeling, and then what they needed and what they wanted. So it was a bit of a, how many days do you think you need in the office to be able to do your job? Is it none? Is it 5? Or what do you want? Where do you want to be? And that surprised me, actually, because I expected a lot more people to say they want to work from home all the time. And actually, we had very few people in our office that wanted to work from home. Most people wanted time in the office at some point, and quite a lot were missing it and wanted to be in full time. So I think from this, we learned that it's important not to assume, because we did make a lot of assumptions on that basis and what we thought they wanted, and it's just, they always surprise you. It's not what you expected, and there are reasons why. And back to what we were saying about people working from home, and from a health and safety point of view, we have a lot of younger members of staff who live at home with their mum and dad, so they just don't have the space. And you know, you could see you doing a video call and they're sat on the bed, and it's kind of like it's not ideal for a working environment. Again, it was another reason for getting to try and help have the space to get them in the office when we could.
So I guess, you know, a big challenge coming up for a lot of us will probably be having that individualistic approach to each member of staff, depending on their preferences, their situation. I mean, Ruth, have you got any other thoughts on kind of big challenges we can expect in the coming months, or that you would expect?
Yeah, I think the point about the diversity and inclusion point. So you've seen the lines of who's been most affected and how that is. You know, that if you can categorise those people, and it's very, I would say, an interesting. Even to the point, I guess maybe I'm talking about the multicultural mix of Peterborough, and then who's most at risk of the virus, and actually statistically. So the families that are affected by that. So there's a massive piece on why people don't want to, and the culture and the actual fear of the killing effectively is the biggest one about not wanting to go back. That is in some. Some of the areas of Peterborough, there's a big deal. You're going to end up excluding people. So that gets to the point where, is it you have to say it's a team decision that you go back? You know, we're going to be asking people who aren't bothered, you know, about and don't really want to go back, because you're trying not to exclude, or you make an office existing completely separately. Interesting. We've done the social side. I think I was surprised. We are doing a fun day, and it was like, you can't do a fun day, and we'll do it in real life. So we offered a virtual version and a real version for the end of August, and so and it came up, and there's a lot of health and safety, but we're doing rounders basically. So outside you can do it to support someone's playing cricket, right? We're doing fun, and I expected that again, like Hannah says about not making assumptions, that it would be like 50-50 that wants to be remote. So we're offering a fun version that's online, and it was 3 wanted it remotely. Everyone else said they'd like to come and meet up.
Oh, it's definitely very interesting.
I was and even if they weren't interested in and we've done a lot of efforts, and we've been quizzes, and we've done, you know, there's lots of social things happening, but that actual physical, that human contact, and whether that will ever really go, you know, even the most unsocial, you know, there's a primary driver that we need, and whether though that does change a bit, where you change the external, so your social contact required. I know a cousin did a bit further ahead, and the director of PwC in Sydney, and they're saying everybody wants to go back, but then when they opened up all the social things, everybody stopped wanting to go back, i.e. you need the social impact. So I think, who knows, I do think there might be a challenge on the other side of it is that's been really positive in this is about increased empowerment and trust of the employees. So there's a different style of working has come out because we've had to, and so some of those things we actually reduced our hours a bit as well, and then people work with children. So effectively, people have done a completely flexible working as well. So there's quite a bit of resistance and some people wanting to go back to feeling controlled again. You know that I work really well between 10 p.m. and midnight, so that's what I've been doing the last. If you're in an office, that doesn't work in the same way, and picking up, and so that sense of loss with that. But the question is, can we maintain client service doing that? Is that okay? If that does suit that person, did it actually affect others? Or we're gonna have a load of hour workers and a load of dawn workers, you know, and it's all, and they naturally gravitate. So it's, I think there will be some tricky decisions about, maybe the benefit isn't for it's a lot about the individuals at the moment, and it is about the individuals and the fear of this, but then it's about also getting what we want as a business out of, you know, there's some business thing, that's the connectivity. You know, I'm really happy working in the Highlands, but if the internet doesn't work, you know, that's, you know, and so I suppose might be some challenges there around how that's going to look going forward, and what conversations we have to have, you know, that final.
Sure. Thank you, Ruth. I just wondered, just as we're sort of tying up at the end here, because we've heard from AAT and ACCA, but I know we've got Fiona from ICAEW and Leighton from CIMA. I just wondered if you've got any sort of thoughts on anything you've heard that you wanted to sort of add on as we're finishing off?
I think it's really comforting to hear that we're all in the same boat and all doing very similar things. So yeah, that, you know, there was the danger, I guess, that someone's way ahead of everybody else and we're all worried that we need to play catch up. So I think that's really great and really comforting to everybody. Just as a quick update from ICAEW, we have opened both of our UK offices in London and Milton Keynes, but that is just for a very limited number of staff. So either those that need to be in the office really to do their job, so like some people in our finance teams who need to take payments in a secure environment, or staff who have requested it individually because for personal reasons they've been struggling from home, and of course we want to support them in the best way, so we're allowing them to go in. Has
there been a lot of staff that have requested that sort of thing?
Not a lot, but a few. Yeah, certainly one person in my team is back in the office most days because he was struggling at home. So yeah, and of course we'll do that where we can. The office, as other people have said, does look very different, and we've got videos and pictures on the intranet that people can look at before they make that decision. So yeah, the kitchens look pretty empty, not many tables and chairs to sit and have your lunch. A lot of the desks are out of action. In the lifts, we've got the feet marks on the floor, we have to face away from each other and things like that, so it's very strange, and we've got big screens up so that people can't sit opposite each other, so it does limit your view. You might, you know, people might be thinking, I want to go into the office for that people interaction, but you're not getting much people interaction at the moment.
Well, I wonder how long it'll be before I can get back into the business centre, because I love going to the business centre when I'm in London, and I'm guessing that'll be quite a while. Leighton, yeah. Any sort of closing thoughts?
Very much echoing what Fiona's just said, and I think the key thing for us has been what Sophie said at the outset. It's not just about the offices. The offices, actually getting the offices more safe and sorted out would be easier for public transport. It's getting people to those offices. We've got 28 offices in 18 countries. Currently, we've only got China open for very limited staff. As Fiona's just said, there's certain functions we've discovered, such as our tuition provider pass rate reporting system, but we can only do actually in the Helicon in London. So that's going to be a prioritisation.
That's why we haven't seen any pass rates.
I've been getting, but that'll be basically like a national trust, business in a national trust centre. You'll have to book in for a certain amount of hours, like an AM or a PM slot, and have valid reason to do so, and go in and out. The guiding principles, I'm sure the same for everybody. It's about staff wellbeing, comfort, government regulations. I don't think there's going to be any immediate change soon. I don't think our offices will fully reopen, perhaps until looking into the new year. But certain key functions will be able to go into the office at set times. And it's just been reassuring to hear what other people are doing today, and think, yeah, very much trying to do the right thing across the board.
Thank you, Leighton. Thank you, Fiona. And thank you very much to Hannah, Ruth, Sophie and Clive. I've found that really fascinating, actually. And I think, like we were saying towards the end there, it's just nice to see that we are all in the same boat. So thank you, everybody. I've really enjoyed that. We will be sending the recording out as usual. But apart from that, enjoy what looks like it's going to be a really rather splendid weekend. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.